Hey guys, so I'm just here to share our next thought for the day. So yesterday Lara talked about the fulfillment of the law and what that means. And so the next few bits in this passage of Matthew chapter 5 are quite deep. I'm probably not going to go into detail with them. He talks about anger, adultery, and divorce and vows. I'm going to assume that none of you guys are going to be getting divorced too soon in BPC Youth. But essentially, but why he says this, how there is great significance in why he says these things. We've got to remember that when Jesus taught this, he was preaching to Jews who have been following a sacred law that was given to them unto Moses like a long, long time before. This is their entire history, their entire heritage, their entire culture, their entire religion. And Jesus is coming here saying, no, this is all wrong. You should change it like this, and this. And obviously, everyone's the Pharisees and some of the Jews are thinking, yeah, who's this guy? He's coming and literally changing everything about how we understand how to do life. It was radical. It was a big deal. And of course, Jesus was persecuted for that later on and eventually was crucified. So Jesus coming out and saying these things, it's not trivial. It's not like they're not just like menial comments. It's a big deal. He's coming here and completely changing the way that the Jews do life. I am going to read the following two sections about revenge and about loving your enemies. So I'm just going to read through those now. You have heard the law that says, the punishment must match the injury, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evil person. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, offer them the other cheek also. If you are sued in court and your shirt is taken from you, give your coat too. If a soldier demands that you carry his gear for a mile, carry it 2 miles. Give to those who ask, and don't turn away from those who want to borrow. That's the one on revenge. And I'm just going to read the one on love your enemies as well. You have heard the law that says, love your neighbour and hate your enemy. But I say, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. In that way, you'll be acting as true children of your Father in heaven. For he gives his sunlight to both the evil and the good, and he sends rain on the just and the unjust alike. If you love only those who love you, what reward is there for that? Even corrupt tax collectors do that much. If you are kind only to your friends, how are you different from anyone else? Even pagans do that. But you are to be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. So this one about revenge and about turning the other cheek. I just want to make a quick comment on this because I think this is something that a lot of people do not get quite right. There's two ways. There's ways that you can respond to evil. One is to be very active and openly rebuke the person that's persecuting in quite an upfront and confrontational manner. Maybe even shout at them if your temper is short, or swear if you're that way inclined. That's not a good idea. The Bible does not say that's a good idea. So naturally, I think a lot of Christians fall onto the far other end of the spectrum, which is to be very passive and just to not do anything at all. And that feels like the good Christian thing to do. But actually, that's not right either, because that's the equivalent of that too passive stance is just to let the person slap you over and over again on the same cheek. Rather, this says turn the other cheek. So what that means is when someone persecutes you and they're slapping you on the cheek, you have to take on the cross's response, not an active response or a passive response, but the cross's response, which is to be, in the words of Timothy Keller, aggressively forgiving. So that means when someone slaps you on the cheek, you turn the other cheek, you say, I forgive you, I love you, let's start again, and you offer your other cheek. And that doesn't come out of pride or self-righteousness, but out of love. So we have to adopt an attitude of the cross with this and be aggressively forgiving, as Timothy Keller would say. And that's what it really means to turn the other cheek, not just letting someone slap you over and over again on the same cheek. Next, about love your enemies. So yeah, there's absolutely no skill required. There's no talent required. There's no righteousness required about loving those that love you. Right? He says even tax collectors do that. Because if someone loves you and you love them back, well, you know that you're going to get the profits out of that relationship. It works out in everyone's favour to love those that love you. That is a low bar. Jesus sets a high bar, and he says, love those that persecute you. That is a far higher calling. We can demonstrate our our obedience to God through that, and we can't through loving those that just love us. Actually, if you want to read more about this, Romans chapter 12, verses 14 through to 21, Paul basically explains how you can love your enemies in a very practical way. So if you want to look at that. And basically what he says is, bless everyone, bless those that persecute you. There's an example in Acts chapter 7 where Paul, who at this stage, he was called Saul back then, and he was an evil guy and he was persecuting people. He basically made it his job to hunt Christians down. And in Acts chapter 7, Stephen, who's one of the apostles, no, he's not an apostle. What is he? Oh, I can't remember what they call him. He's a person commissioned by God anyway, and he's being stoned by Paul and his friends. Paul's actually holding the coats for the people that are stoning him. So Stephen's being persecuted by these guys, including Paul, and Stephen prays for those who persecuted him, like it says to in the Bible. And so Stephen prays for them as they're stoning him, and Stephen, obviously, he dies from stoning. But what we know is that later on, Paul actually encounters Jesus and becomes a Christian and ends up writing most of the New Testament. And so what one of our church fathers, St. Augustine, said is that the church owes Paul to the prayer of Stephen. So and what he's saying there is, as Paul and his friends are stoning Stephen and Stephen's praying for them, praying for Paul, he says that's one of the greatest reasons why Paul ended up encountering Jesus. And that may well be true. We have no idea how massive the implications are for praying for those that are persecuting us. We have no scope. We have no idea. Stephen will have died at that time not knowing how powerful his prayer for Paul could have been, which is that he ended up becoming a Christian and writing most of the New Testament, which is a really incredible thing. So my thoughts are, remember to pray for those who persecute you. That's what it means to really love our enemies. You can find out more about that in Romans 12. There's no skill in loving those that love us. We have to love our enemies too. And secondly, to remember to turn the other cheek and not just let people slap you over and over again on the same cheek. We have to take on an attitude of the cross and be aggressively forgiving. Those are my thoughts for the day. Next, I believe we'll be bleeding through into Matthew 6, because that's the end of Matthew 5 just there. Great. Okay. See you soon.